Hello there, listeners. Thank you for tuning into this exciting series where I talk about the misconceptions of Anne Boleyn and do my best to spread the word to correct history when it comes to this fabulous royal soul. As Anne was quoted as saying before she was murdered, yes, I said murdered, by King Henry VIII, quote, "If any person will meddle of my cause, I require thee to judge the best," end quote. Well, yes, Anne, I am meddling, and I am here to announce to the world that you are not who people think you were. In fact, you are quite the opposite. A royal historian, Hayley Nolan, said in her book, Anne Boleyn, 500 Years of Lies, #the truth will out. But hey, listen, before I begin, if you don't mind, do me a quick favor that I promise won't hurt you in any way. Give this video a thumbs up, comment below, and royally hit that subscribe button. The first misconception that I want to tackle here today is this. Anne's father pushed Anne to grab the attention of King Henry VIII and seduced him into loving her so that she could become queen and her family would have power at court. As much as that sounds super juicy to everyone's ears, it is in fact wrong. First off, Thomas Boleyn already had a powerful position in the English court as a diplomat. He traveled back and forth between the French and English court to work out negotiations. Also, Anne's father had a close relationship with her and expected Anne to hold herself with respect and grace. The last thing he would want would be to place Anne in a position that could potentially be a disgrace to her honor and her family. You see, according to Hayley Nolan on page 13 of her book, she states, quote, Boleyn family expert and historian Dr. Lauren McKay states in her doctoral study of Anne's father Thomas that securing such an illustrious placement for his daughter reveals a great deal about his relationship with his middle child, not only in that he sought out such a placement, but trusted she would conduct herself well and bring honor to the Boleyn family, end quote. The illustrious placement was in the court of Archduchess Marguerite of Austria. Marguerite herself wrote to Thomas that she found Anne to be, quote, so bright and pleasant, end quote, and that she is thankful for having had Anne around. The education that Anne received from Marguerite was the same as a highborn boy's during Tudor times, proving that Anne was being taught to hold herself to a higher standard than the girls back home only learning household duties. Why would a father place their daughter in such a prestigious court and to be equally educated among the high-born boys if he was going to plan on having Anne's reputation ruined by pushing her to become mistress and then eventually queen? It makes no sense at all. Not to mention, during the time that this so-called pimping out of his daughters took place, sources actually put Anne in France in that year 1515, where she lived a sheltered and protective life and tended to Queen Claude, Francis I's wife. And by the time Anne even reached England, Thomas was still back at the French court. Interesting. On page 14 of Nolan's book, she finds, quote, Anne spent over a year following a strict regime of study and courtly etiquette at the hands of an inspirational and powerful female ruler, end quote. Now, Anne was surrounded by strict reformists at the French court, not to mention her dad was with her from 1518 to 1520 as well, keeping a close eye on his daughter, making sure she was being brought up a lady. Oh yes, Thomas did not mess around when it came to the purity of his daughter. What's that now? That doesn't sound like the Thomas Boleyn you know from TV shows and movies? Well, too bad, so sad. To fight the claim that Anne flirted with everyone with the goal to bed every single one of them, let's make it clear that Anne's time at French court actually created a very intelligent, confident, and successful woman. She became outspoken, especially about religion. When she arrived at the English court in December 1521, sources shared from Nolan stated that she was charming, communicated with grace, and had very good manners. No wonder she ended up serving Queen Katherine of Aragon, Queen of England. Oh wait, we were just talking about Anne being a flirtatious concubine, right? Why would Anne even be accepted into the intimate space of Queen Catherine if she were a WHORE? Right. Makes sense. No, it doesn't. Also, when Anne came to English court, it was Wolsey himself that was working to arrange a marriage between Anne and James Butler, a courtier. In a letter found by Nolan in her book, Wolsey writes, quote, "On my return, I will talk with you about how to bring about the marriage between Butler's son and Sir Thomas Boleyn's daughter, which will be a good pretext for delaying to send his son over to Ireland," end quote. However, that arrangement didn't last, as there was some squabble between Butler's father and Anne's father over titles. Also, during this time, Anne had been pursued by another potential match, Henry Percy. However, when Wynne got word that Percy was trying to negotiate a marriage arrangement with Anne, Percy's father threatened his inheritance if he didn't return to another woman who he was supposed to be in an arranged marriage with. And Wolsey, under Henry's orders, was set to interfere to straighten that whole thing out. And Anne was ordered to return home to Hever Castle. By the way, all this happened in 1523. So while this scandal was taking place, it would make no sense for Thomas Boleyn to push Anne to seduce the king. They were too busy working out marriage negotiations between Anne and James. In fact, it was the other way around. Sources revealed in the book show that what we were told about Anne seducing King to divorce Catherine is actually false, because 9 to 10 years earlier, from 1532, when we are told the thought first came about, to 1522 or 1533, the king had been seeking information about divorce. In other words, before Henry became obsessed with Anne, he had already been entertaining the thought of divorce from Catherine. This puts Anne at the time of when she was hoping to marry Henry Percy. So how does this show that Anne was seducing the king? Well, it doesn't. Also, when Henry set his sights on Anne in 1526, she felt forced to leave court in order to get away from him. According to Nolan, Anne had reasons to refuse. One that she states was the fact that Mary, her sister, was in fact the king's mistress for a time, and that ended in 1525. Also noting the fact that one or both of Mary's children were possibly Henry's and not her husband, William Carey's. Another reason was that Anne actually loved Queen Catherine and enjoyed being a lady-in-waiting to the queen. Why give up that relationship to be seen as a WHORE? Nolan also suggests that another reason to refuse is that by her giving up into the king's advances, she would have to give up one of the things she was most passionate about: evangelism. Also, the notion that this outspoken woman would give up her entire belief system just to satisfy a king does not sound like something a strong Anne would do. Anne was said to have gotten into debates with men at court. I hardly think she would just give everything she believed in up. Anne had left for roughly 2 years to get away from Henry and his court and retrieve back to Hever Castle. However, with the king being relentless and Anne starting to become a little scared, she had to give in. The last thing she would probably want was to have her family stripped of their titles and wealth. She did not want to be the cause of their downfall. So she eventually gave in and did the best she could with what she was forcibly given. Unfortunately, the man that apparently loved her also murdered her. So you see, Anne was not the one seeking the king's attention, and her father did not wish for his daughter to become a mistress or the queen. Why take on Queen Catherine? She was liked regardless of the difference in religious beliefs. It just doesn't make sense. Well, listeners, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Anne Boleyn case on For the Love of History. Remember to royally hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, as always, keep loving history and stay curious.